Let's get to also some pretty good news, but there are some tinges of darkness in it, so we'll get to it in a second here. Unemployment down big time. Lots of people got a job in the past month. This is despite the fact that, of course, Victoria is offline and too many of our states currently have the borders up. 111,000 people, basically the MCG, if it was accepting people, would have a seat in it for every person who got a job in the past month alone. 36,000 full-time jobs, the majority 74,000 part-time jobs, while things like hospitality start to turn on around the country. This is good. That said, 921,000 people are still unemployed in the country. Let's not forget about it, let alone 3 million people who are still being held on because of JobKeeper. All of that very important, but we should always take a time to say things are starting to turn and they're turning for the better. The Prime Minister making that point today.
The measured rate of unemployment is one thing, but we know it's much higher than that. We know the effective rate of unemployment is well over 10%. But you can't keep the Australian economy on JobKeeper forever. That is not a way to do things. Currently it's costing about $11 billion a month.
Should have pointed out too that the actual recorded rate of unemployment has gone from 7.5 down to 6.8. Victoria, well, about 42,000 people have lost their job in the past month alone. Now remember, the lockdowns had gone for even longer than that period of time. So, put simply, that is the cost of businesses that were not able to hold on with JobKeeper and all the rest of it. So you can imagine those numbers could be even more concerning in the next little while. Here's Josh Frydenberg making that point today.
So while we saw jobs being created in every state, it was except Victoria, where jobs were lost. Now these numbers take into account the stage 4 restrictions that came in early August. The situation in my state of Victoria remains very, very difficult and challenging.
Now we also got some information today that Australia's approach when it comes to coronavirus, while punishing, certainly in those first few months, generally speaking, has worked compared to the rest of the world. And finally, the evidence is in. All of those who say, why don't we do what Queen Jacinta Ardern does? Let's lock everyone down. Well, guess what happens when no one's allowed to leave their house? Exactly what happened in Victoria. Their economy has crashed. They have not just entered a recession like Australia, but the amount of which their economy went backwards in the past few months is well and truly above international average. They've gone back 12% in just 3 months, 12%. Compare that to Australia at 7%, and even the United States was under 10% at 9.5%. So the New Zealand economy has been hit harder by coronavirus as a result of the lockdown mentality than the United States, with hundreds of thousands of deaths and millions of cases, and Australia, that has, generally speaking, with the obvious exception of Victoria and the second wave, done a good job. However, borders, of course, need to come down because, while Jacinta Ardern may be taking photos in Vogue magazine, and that'll keep Twitter happy, it's not all about our leaders, because let's have a look at some of the different states. Oh, what a pout. Let's actually compare states to states. The lockdown states of South Australia, Queensland and Western Australia. I call them that because they are locked down from interacting with the rest of the country. The national unemployment rate is 6.8%. South Australia, the worst in the country. Shame on Stephen Marshall, a Liberal Premier who should have known better but hasn't. Instead has held on and been too cautious in his approach, so he's been rewarded with the worst unemployment rate in the country. Our mates in Queensland, are you paying attention? 7.5%. You are above national average. We'll get to that in deeper conversation. For those who think that King McGowan is the best thing since sliced bread, you have a worse unemployment rate than the country, and just in front of Victoria. Victoria is the only state that you are beating in Western Australia, and that is after Victoria's been in lockdown for 6 weeks.